All right. So this was actually sent to us by the OG dissident Virtuoso. So I'm going to do some follow-ups to this segment later in the week. I didn't really get into the DEI element of why Hollywood is underperforming right now because that's a big story in and of itself, and it's not just happening in Hollywood. It's happening in Wall Street and across industries. You're having lawyers telling corporations that they better change their policies in that area because they're going to get sued. There is actually a lawsuit against CBS from a writer who's basically arguing reverse discrimination. So we'll get into that. And Disney, of course, is always fun. So we'll beat up on Disney later in the week. But I wanted to keep this more focused for Oscar Sunday. So this came from Virtuoso, this article, and it sets a good tone for, I think, the mood of the Oscars this year. Ellen DeGeneres' Oscars selfie marked the end of the Academy Awards' cultural relevance. No one can really explain what will prove to be popular online, but in 2014, an instance of virality served as something of a cultural low watermark, as well as a fusing of two of the most abhorrent facets of the human experience, Ellen DeGeneres and the selfie. All right, this nasty bastard is a writer after my own heart. I admire.
You should apply to write
that,
for this magazine.
I really should. I really should. At the Oscars that year, DeGeneres posted a picture shot by Bradley Cooper of a swath of famous Hollywood actors and their accused sexual abuser friend. It was the best photo ever, according to DeGeneres, known for her forced eccentric behavior and enabling abusive mistreatment on the Ellen DeGeneres show. Brad Pitt, one of contemporary American cinema's biggest stars, looks as though he's been dragged into something he really does not want to be a part of, his face blurred almost in a state of embarrassment, mirrored by then-wife Angelina Jolie's no paparazzi hand block, while Jennifer Lawrence and Meryl Streep do a better job of a seemingly earnest appearance of actual joy. Yeah, the four of them in the front are doing a much better job. And then who's that above DeGeneres? Who is that?
That's Julia Roberts.
Is that Julia Roberts?
And then you have Lupita Nyong'o over
is,
Brad Pitt's shoulder, and I don't know who the other guy is, the white guy between Jennifer Lawrence and Julia Roberts.
Well, and he mentions that. I didn't clip that part of the article, but he mentions that they pulled her in just to save face on how white this picture is.
That's right.
They probably grabbed her like, hey,
was that
you
the
want to be in
famous
this
Oscar
picture?
So White year? It may have been.
I think it might have been. So Kevin Spacey, meanwhile, just a few years away from the allegations of grooming and sexual abuse, haunts the background like a ghost, still fortunate to be in the most famous photo of recent times. The selfie suddenly earned iconic status, despite its rather banal, even mundane nature, poor quality, and lack of any cultural importance or meaning beyond, hey, look, it's us, those famous people. The 86th Academy Awards, hosted by DeGeneres for the second time, actually became the most watched Oscars ceremony since 2000, signaling perhaps a waning interest in the event itself. Throughout the 20th century, the Oscars had been the be-all and end-all for most figures within the American cinema and Hollywood industry machines. But since the turn of the new millennium, the event itself seems to have been dragged along like a nearly dead relative at a family function, just for tradition despite its decrepit and decaying state. Yeah, it kind of feels that way. Look, my prediction is that they will have a little bump because of Barbie and Oppenheimer. That it'll probably have better ratings than it's had over the last few years. But I think it will not signify a trend, but an outlier. Like I don't think it's gonna. I think it'll probably have a little pop up tonight.
Could be.
I think Barbie in particular is going to drag people in. They're going to be curious because there was the controversy about the nominations. They're going to be curious about how that
it
plays
was
out.
oddly enough. I mean, I haven't seen many of them, but from what I've seen, it's been a relatively good year for movies, I think. I mean, the movies have just been horrible the past few years, but it's actually been relatively good.
I will say I went to see two very good movies last week, which Poor Things was very good. I didn't agree with some of its kind of like Western white feminist viewpoint on sex work, which it was clearly kind of pushing. But I mean, that's neither here nor there. It was a great film. It was a great film. And Dune 2, which actually was supposed to be a 2023 release. It got held because of the strikes. That was fucking great. That was great. That was about as well as you could adapt Dune, which, let's face it, in a cinema format, in a non-miniseries format, is somewhat unadaptable. There are elements of that you just don't have enough time to explain unless you're going to make a 6-hour movie.
Right.
But on those terms, he did a great job. So yeah, no, I mean, there's some stuff. So the New York Times got into the economics of this. If you want to hear a really great analysis of the element of how, people just absolutely hate the kinds of people represented in that picture, Gary on Nerdrotic, his last video essay, got into that a little more. And one thing he points out was during COVID, when they dropped these cringe videos like them all singing Imagine, and after George Floyd, them putting out these really contrived videos, I take responsibility,
Right.
Aaron Paul and the rest of the usual suspects really emoting their best. Gary pointed out in his essay, everybody's locked up at home and they're allowed to work, and they are among the loudest virtue signalers in favor of lockdowns. And then they're dropping these narcissistic tone deaf videos. He makes a pretty good case that was kind of a last straw for a lot of people with their relationship to these Hollywood celebrities and what they represent. So that's worth checking out. But on the economics, the New York Times did a carefully curated to not at all mention how DEI is impacting writers' rooms version of what's happening in Hollywood. But on a business level, it's pretty insightful, even though those elements of why Hollywood is collapsing are notably absent from the piece. But for a business analysis, it's worth taking a look at. For Hollywood, 2023 was not so much a disaster as a preview of disasters to come. Sure, one of the big stories last year was the Barbenheimer phenomena, two celebrated hits that marched arm in arm toward a combined 21 Oscar nominations. But everywhere else you look, the prognosis is grim. The industry, still staggering back from the pandemic shutdowns, was hit with twin strikes that brought production to a halt for 6 months. Writers, actors, and virtually the rest of Hollywood's workforce were united in animus against the studio bosses, who in their refusal to cut necessary deals blithely cast themselves in the role of supervillain. That fury persists. Every new headline about the huge compensation package for Robert Iger, Disney's chief executive, or decisions by David Zaslav, the chief executive of Warner Brothers Discovery, to shelve entire projects for tax write-offs, undergirds a prevailing narrative that the people who finance the movies are becoming the enemies of the people who make them. Okay, so right there, that little bit of editorializing, I think, is out of touch. I think that narrative is a narrative among people who don't see anything wrong with the industry other than economic causes. Culturally, Hollywood has really alienated itself from the public, and as a result, most of the public didn't care that Hollywood went on strike. Like, a writer for the New York Times is probably not going to be somebody who's capable of seeing that side of it. But I will just mention, yeah, I don't agree with that take. I don't think the average person sees the CEOs of the companies as villains. They see the whole industry as part of an elite class that they've come to despise. Moving along. All of this is happening as the industry seems to be realizing in unison that streaming services, those wondrous platforms that were going to carry the town into the future like magic carpets, maybe aren't a panacea after all. And hanging over all this anger and anxiety is the menace of artificial intelligence, which threatens every human part of the creative food chain, from the writers who pen scripts to the actors whose faces fill the screens to, theoretically, the studio executives whose jobs are piloting hits. I mean, honestly, an AI could not do any worse. The industry has, for the past 4 years, been wondering when it can get back to normal, and it's becoming increasingly clear that there may be no such thing. There is only forward to something new. The industry is about to find out what that might look like. Now, his take on this is pretty interesting. In the ashes of last year, an outline of this new normal started to emerge. It's a landscape that consists not just of big studios, this isn't the 1950s, or big studios competing with upstart indies that steal their awards, this isn't the 1990s, but of a mix of new and old models. Studios, indies, streamers like Apple, Amazon, and Netflix, and the kind of out-of-nowhere hits, faith-based movies, and red state phenomena like Sound of Freedom that keep taking people on the coasts by surprise. It's also a landscape that, like so many these days, involves Taylor Swift. In 2023, Taylor Swift The Eras Tour bypassed traditional distributors, went straight to theaters, and outgrossed all but 10 of last year's biggest movies domestically. If theaters are going to survive, this kind of communal event, the you have to be there with 20 friends movie dance party, is probably going to be integral to their future. The year 2023 provided two blockbusters that are going head to head for Best Picture, a Hollywood studio dream come true. But that can't erase the fact that superhero movies, the industry's cash cow for the past dozen years, showed ominous signs of collapse. All four of Warner's DC movies underperformed, including Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, Shazam! Fury of the Gods, The Flash, and Blue Beetle. Disney's The Marvels, a sequel to Captain Marvel, which grossed $427 million, and there's my editorial note, worldwide, I think it grossed $1 billion. He's just talking about domestic. Earned a woeful $85 million. It seems unkind even to mention Sony's disastrous attempt at building out a Spider-Man extended universe with Madam Web. Superhero movies aren't finished. Disney and Warner Brothers have locked in multi-year, multi-movie plans, and Deadpool and Wolverine is likely to be a hit this summer. But what had been a bulletproof business plan is in tatters. The days when audiences would faithfully trot out for every interconnected chapter of a cinematic universe saga are over. That's no longer entertainment, that's homework. Okay, side note, so what he's saying about them building out multi-year, multi-movie plans, yeah, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. They can't just keep losing hundreds of millions of dollars on these movies. I said this as soon as Marvel dropped its Phase 5 and Phase 6, as soon as Disney dropped their Marvel plan going into the next Avengers movie, I said there's no way they're going to get to that next Avengers movie. They can't just lose money on one movie after another and build out this whole second phase of this cinematic universe with characters nobody cares about and movies nobody wants to see. So I think he's wrong about that. Yeah, like it'll never go away, just like Westerns never went away, but they don't make Westerns like they used to.
Right, right.
So, and we'll get into his analysis of what the industry is going to look like when we finish. All right, so jumping ahead a little bit, it's possible that the bungled decisions that led to two prolonged strikes, the most vigorous recent attempt by studio heads to shoot themselves in the foot, created one unanticipated benefit, a green shoot of improbable hope, a serious delay in the completion of giant franchise movies. Given their recent disappointing box office numbers, a few of those decades-old franchises like The Fast and the Furious and Mission Impossible may have finally reached retirement age. Now this observation is interesting, and I've heard this someplace else. I might have even heard this from you. I think you might have said this. In light of this blockbuster shortage and out of sheer panicked supply chain necessity, Hollywood is looking at and buying and even making plans to produce a bunch of scripts that can get off the ground fast and be cast, shot, and edited reasonably quickly. They're the kinds of films that don't require a $250 million budget and a year of complicated post production work. They're films like Hamnet, directed by the Oscar winner Chloe Zhao, whose last film was an underperforming Marvel movie, Eternals, and Novocaine, a thriller acquired by Paramount starring Jack Quaid.
Chloe Zhao also made Nomadland, which won the Oscar for Best Picture a few years before. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's part of what was weird about the Eternals. It kind of looked like the director of Nomadland doing a movie that she should never have been hired to make because she didn't get the genre at all. But it has those kind of like desolate landscapes that she really likes, just applied to like a superhero movie. And Novocaine, a thriller acquired by Paramount starring Jack Quaid. Even Tom Cruise, who hasn't starred in a non-franchise movie since 2017, is teaming with the Oscar-winning director Alejandro Iñárritu.
That's one of the best films. That's my best filmmaker of the 21st century. Amores Perros, 21 Grams, Babel, Beautiful, Birdman, The Revenants. I mean, his worst movie is Babel. If Babel's your worst movie, you're pretty damn good.
They're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
These are self-contained films that don't demand moviegoers have a PhD in previous installments or extended universes. They're the kinds of films you might sometimes wish Hollywood made more of. Maybe you remember them. They're what used to be called movies. So he ends on a kind of hopeful note there. He covers a lot of ground. Like I said, I think he has a couple of big blind spots about the cultural backlash and the way that this very, very misguided attempt to impose DEI on the writers' rooms and other aspects of the filmmaking process have affected the product and alienated fan bases. But that aside, some of the other things that he gets into are interesting. I think his vision of what things look like going forward is pretty much what we've been saying. Hollywood will be one thing among many content creating bases. It's going to be coming from many different places, with Hollywood just being one. I thought that was pretty insightful, saying Amazon, Apple, because I think that's where things are going to go. I think these movie studios are going to get absorbed by tech companies and be a branch of their operations. Ultimately, Paramount's for sale right now. Disney is in the middle of a possible hostile takeover bid. There are talks of, there are rumors that they might sell off parts of the business, part of what Iger acquired in his mad acquisition scramble if the financial situation gets desperate enough. And what he says at the end there, I agree. I think they're going to have to back off on this. All started with them trying to make movies that people with limited English could appreciate. That's why everything became a blockbuster, because they started to only want to make movies that they could sell in overseas markets, which precludes movies like The Godfather that are very dialogue heavy.
And also the Taylor Swift concert film, outperforming all but 10 movies at last year's box office. I mean, that says it all. Like, the theaters are going to be reserved for the big spectacle movies, which is going to influence the distribution model of everything else, which is going to have to drive down cost, which is going to have to at some point, like, if you want to keep the grips employed and you want to hire human beings to write music and not AI, at some point, these movie stars are going to have to start taking a bit of a pay cut. Like, you could still be rich. Like, you could live on $2 million a movie. You don't have to get $25 million a movie if you're Tom Cruise or Brad Pitt. Like, there's a whole lot of money there that can be freed up to actually keep, like, human beings working and keep the spirit of creativity in the arts alive through what is going to be, obviously, a very seismic shift. We're already seeing, like, the movies this year, with the exception of Barbie, and I think The Zone of Interest is a fairly modest runtime. All the nominated films are running crazy long. You have Killers of the Flower Moon, 3.5 hours. You have Oppenheimer's 3 hours. Even the little drama like The Anatomy of the Fall, 2.5 hours. Like, the average used to be about 2 hours. You're seeing it longer, and that's, I think,
like
the advent
140. 145.
Exactly.
Most
yeah,
movies.
You don't see those anymore. You hardly ever see those anymore. And that's because I think the medium is shifting to the point where now audiences are getting used to the episodic long form pieces, like the miniseries. The miniseries used to be like a laughable thing. Like at the award shows,
Right.
best performance in a miniseries would be actors you never
Right.
heard of and things you
Right.
never heard of.
Right.
Now the miniseries is huge because of Netflix. Like all the Mike Flanagan horror things are miniseries. That great one a few years
Right.
ago with Kate Winslet, Mayor of Easttown, absolutely fantastic. Like those are now what people remember most. So that's affecting the structure of the movies, and it's going to affect the distribution of the movies. Like anybody who makes a movie now can list their movie on Amazon. You just have to get it subtitled, which
Right.
costs about
Right.
$100, and you're on Amazon. And at which point
Right.
you can distribute that movie globally.
Right.
Now, odds are it's not going to go anywhere.
Nobody's
But if
gonna
something
watch
really
it.
good
Yeah.
catches fire, we've seen it happen before. A movie comes out of nowhere, catches fire. They could have put like the Blair Witch Project on Amazon, if it were made now, and had it take off that way. They wouldn't have had to go through the film festivals and hope that the right person buys it. So
Right.
you have to spend 20 grand throwing a party to give the studio douchebags their champagne so they come and rub elbows and buy the thing. Like you don't have to do that anymore. And that opens up movie making to a lot of different artists. It makes it harder in a way, but also easier in a way. And it could actually be a very good thing for film as a medium, as an art form. But as this piece lays out, it changes the entire business of it, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because I think one of the reasons why movies have been so awful lately is because it's been running on this old model and not be able to put out work that actually reflects the changing imperatives of the model. You have your virtuosos, you have your geniuses like Christopher Nolan. I started watching Oppenheimer last night, couldn't finish it because it's 3 fucking hours. But yeah, really good. I mean, he does the whole thing where he plays with the timeline and he makes it move quickly, even though it's long. And obviously, Scorsese is one of the greats. Iñárritu's mentioned that article, just absolutely epic filmmaker, virtuoso. Babel wasn't that bad. No, Babel was actually quite good. That's my point. Like, if that's your worst film, that means you're a beast of a filmmaker, which he is. So you're going to have your geniuses. But the sort of median, sort of above average quality film, quote unquote, has just gone way down. That movie that won last year, Everything Everywhere All at Once, unwatchable. Couldn't sit through 15 minutes of it.
I am currently about 15 minutes into it, so I guess you call it just like the over under man. You are the over under man.
Yeah,
that's what I'm going to start calling you, man, because you nailed it. I stopped watching it at about 15
It's
minutes.
unwatchable. Yeah, like it is literally an unwatchable movie. And so, like this is kind of as we're billing it, perhaps the first post-Hollywood Oscar night. And it actually happens to be a year where I think the industry is starting to catch up to the new reality. I think those really dark days are probably in the past.
Yeah,
for the business. I mean, for movies, as far as the business, yes, I agree. That business model is a thing of yesterday.
Well, yeah, I mean that's because I didn't want to make this like a 5-part mini series in and of itself. So that's a whole other side of it that I did some research on that I'll probably save for a separate segment. The labor side of this, the below the line worker side of this, is brutal. There have been several articles about this, about how all of the grips, the lighting people, the costume people who at peak streaming, you had more work than you could take. And now you're seeing people who've been working steady for 14 years who can't get a job.
Yes.
They're going out as what you call day players, where you just, you get a couple days work here, a couple days of work there. You got seasoned veterans who have worked 40 days the entire 2023, because there's just been a complete collapse in content production. And if I'm remembering the figure correctly, I was also reading an article about how if you're an actor entering the industry right now, as hard an industry as it was in the past, you are fucked. You are fucked. They have their people, and even those people can't get work. New meat, new blood, there's just no need for it. Pilot season was always a very big moment on an actor's calendar, and everybody in the industry. If I'm remembering the figure correctly, it was from a Deadline article. I think they said normally you have 500 pilots, and they have 5 this year in the pipeline.
Wow.
Now, one of the reasons for that is also that IATSE, is threatening to go on strike.
Right.
And there's the Teamsters who move everything around, set everything up. They're threatening to go on strike this summer. So even studios that might be inclined to start ramping back up, they're holding back because they don't know if there's going to be another strike in a few months. But it's not principally the strikes, in my opinion. It's a collapsing business model. And I've been saying all along, as this AI technology advances, it eliminates the gatekeeping, which is really what makes an industry. Why is there a car industry? Because you can't make one. That's why. Once you can go on your computer with AI and make a Hollywood quality movie, that's why I say this is going to fall to tech companies, because tech companies are making their money another way. They'll be making money off the AI. So they can afford, just like, look, FAO Schwartz had a legendary toy store on Fifth Avenue. It was the world's largest toy store. If you ever saw Tom Hanks dance on the piano in Big, that's where they shot it. And it's not that it wasn't a profitable business, but they lost that space because the landlord wanted to increase the rent 400%. Moved in Apple. You think Apple is making money off that Apple store? No. But they're a worldwide brand. They don't need to. They can afford to have that store for the visibility and for the advertising.
Apple, that building at the time was the most expensive in New York City.
Right. That's the GM building. Yep. Apple, Amazon, they're making their money another way. They can afford to have these film studios as a billboard for their enterprise, for their brand, for their company.
It's marketing.
Right. With the advance of AI, just making movies as a business, not attached to another business, I don't think that's going to be a viable business model anymore. Not at that scale. Not if you want to make these very expensive kinds of productions. And also the difference with the advance of AI, the difference between those productions and the production a 13-year-old can make, that gap is going to narrow to the point that what do you need them for? That's why I'm saying it's only going to be to, like, you need the money to hire very famous people, and those very famous people will probably be famous from Instagram and YouTube rather than from Hollywood per se.
Please clap.